There's been a terrible accident. As the Planet Express crew are out on a delivery, they face down an attack by space pirates. They manage to fend off their assailants by firing a torpedo, only to realize to their horror that it wasn't a torpedo at all. It was Bender. The robot had been taking a nap in the firing tube, and with the ship not fast enough to catch up to him, now he is doomed to drift through space forever, alone for eternity. Bender is soon torn out of his silent contemplation by a small asteroid colliding with his body, and on that asteroid lives a civilization of tiny people, the Shrimpkins, who now see Bender as their god, the Metal Lord. Through his chosen messenger Malachi, Bender orders his new followers to make him some beer, and to thank them for their diligence, decides to answer their prayers and grant what he can. But each time it goes horribly wrong. A prayer for wind leads to a deadly squall, a prayer for sunlight grants death and fire, a prayer for wealth ends in bodies crushed under the weight of gold. Soon, Bender refuses to help at all, terrified of causing further harm. Eventually, Bender's followers find themselves at war with another clan of Shrimpkins who deny the existence of the Metal Lord. Malachi pleads with him to intervene and protect his people, but Bender cannot bring himself to act. And before his eyes, his followers and the unbelievers all die at one another's hands, leaving him alone once more. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Bender's friends search desperately for a means to find him. When they learn of the monks of Teshuvah, who believe it is their duty to search the heavens for God, and that their monastery contains the most powerful space telescope in the universe, Fry and Leela make for the Himalayas to seek the monks' aid. The monks, of course, refuse, for in their eyes their duty to find God is more important than finding one measly lost robot. In response, Leela threatens the pacifist monks and locks them in the laundry room, allowing Fry access to the telescope to search for Bender. Bender, for his part, floats through space until he comes across a strange nebula, which by all appearances seems to be God, or something similar. They speak to one another, and Bender tells it of what happened when he was God to the Shrimpkins. The entity reassures Bender that he did his best, and that being God is a difficult task. If you solve everyone's problems for them, they grow dependent on you, but if you ignore their plight, they lose hope. It is best, the entity says, to use a light touch, and that when you've done things right, no one will be sure if you've done anything at all. Even so, Bender asks if the entity can send him back to Earth, but the entity says it does not know where exactly Earth is. Weeks pass in the monastery, as Fry continues to desperately search with a telescope to no avail. Perhaps, Leela finally says, they should give up. Even if they spend their whole lives there searching, the odds of actually finding Bender were always astronomically low. Distraught, Fry concedes that she's right. In frustration and despair, he randomly spins the telescope's aiming mechanism, its aim settling on the very same cosmic entity, as he expresses his sincere wish for Bender's return. And the entity hears his prayer. It entreats Bender to remember their conversation before throwing him back toward Earth, where he lands on the mountain just outside the monastery. Reunited with him at last, Fry catches his friend up on everything that happened in the past weeks, and Leela remembers that they left the monks locked up. Fry suggests that their god can let them out, only for Bender to tell them that no, God himself told him that you can't count on him to do anything. And so the three of them return to the monastery to free the monks before going home, as the cosmic entity watches, pleased. Welcome to Space Podcast 3000, where the future is in the past.
Leela seems to be in a good mood today.
How so?
Just singing to herself. She also might just be bored.
She's a ship captain doing what she loves.
Yeah, it's a good job, although you do have to deal with the space pirates sometimes.
I wanted to see more of the space pirates. I'm kind of surprised we haven't really seen more of them in this series yet, because it seems like the perfect kind of anachronism for this show.
Yeah, but honestly, even just here as a one-off gag, I love this. Just the traditional galleons and shit. You know, it's very Treasure Planet.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
I just love the absurdity of, like, the canvas sails and the flags billowing in the vacuum of space.
It could be a solar sail.
It's quite visibly canvas. And then there's the guy who has the straight up cutlass, and the ship is firing cannonballs.
It's got
And he
three
has-
peg legs.
3 peg legs instead. There's
The 2 eye patches, 3 parrots, and he's talking about Davy Jarg's locker. There are so many jokes condensed into this 1-minute scene, and it is fantastic.
Then there's Bender trying to take a nap. Do robots even need naps? I mean, they could probably just shut down.
He's probably recharging his batteries.
That's what alcohol is for. Yeah, it's like I'm sure that was brought up in the thing. It's like robots don't need to sleep. It's like it's Futurama. Who cares? That's what I like about the show is that it has kind of the perfect mix of humor to further the plot, or like things that don't matter in order to further the plot, and things that actually do matter in terms of scientific logic.
Yeah, I mean, also you could always say that maybe he was just napping for pleasure. Like, sometimes I'm not even tired. Sometimes I just want to lie in bed and be lazy just for the hell of it,
True.
And of course, this is the same scene where he has to put ears on just so he can put earplugs in there. So I don't think logic is actually the top priority in this situation.
Fair enough. Although, I have to say, the plot of this episode, where we have this race of tiny people hitching a ride on Bender after their tiny asteroid home collides with him, do you think that what inspired this was, like, the panspermia hypothesis?
Possibly.
The what?
So panspermia is a hypothesis for the origin of life. Namely, it assumes that life is seeded by contact with interstellar bodies like asteroids, comets, and then it just grows from there. Like, that maybe life began on Earth when some space dust or whatever that was carrying microbes hit the Earth, and then that seeded it, and then we evolved from there. And now, this is a fringe theory rejected by most mainstream scientists for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which being that there's no way to test it. But it also doesn't even really answer the question as to the origins of life. It just shoves it off to some other part of space.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, panspermia would, in theory, work. I mean, you could effectively do it to another planet.
It could work, but it doesn't really answer the origins of life, which is the whole purpose of the hypothesis in the first place. It doesn't really do what it was setting out to do. Still, I wonder if that might have been the inspiration for this episode, or even like that one Twilight Zone episode with the Shrimpkins treating Bender as God. It does make me think of that episode, The Little People.
That is in my list as well, which and like the obvious parallels are not only that, but also South Park episode with the episode Sea People and Me, which was a much more overt reference to that, where they end up building statues to the two gods, and then end up nuking each other and suicide bombing each other until they destroy their entire world.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that. Like, I completely forgot about that South Park episode.
Understandable, you're not a fan, but yeah, that's so the whole idea of like condensing kind of the history of the world or the inevitable future. Like, you can also see this in the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, the Genesis tub, which has a very similar concept, and that again was a direct parody of the Little People.
I mean, it was a Twilight Zone episode. Everyone knows the Twilight Zone, so of course stuff's going to draw from it.
So I think this one is a slightly less overt parody, even though it may have been inspired by the concept.
Yeah, again, I don't think it was necessarily a direct reference, more just taking the concept and running with it in their own direction. And hell, on that subject, there's also, like, the God entity, which, Bender describes as quite possibly the remains of a computerized space probe that collided with God.
Which is like the plot of 3 different Star Trek movies.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, having this depicted as an energy cloud makes me think a bit of V'ger from the first Star Trek movie, and then, like, there was that other Star Trek movie, I can't remember which one, that had,
the
that
Final
also
Frontier,
dealt with God.
I think.
Yeah.
What does God need with a starship?
Yeah, it's interesting that this episode does feel almost like a combination of that Twilight Zone episode with the Star Trek movies.
Which is kind of funny, the fact that you can draw parallels to multiple Star Trek movies. So I guess they're not against tackling the big subjects in the movie.
And hell, this isn't even the only time that Futurama would, reference V'ger.
Yeah, that was in a previous one as well, wasn't it?
I think the one you're thinking of is later on. Yeah, because the other V'ger nod is from one of the Comedy Central episodes. So we'll get there. Wait, actually, I just thought of another...
There's another reference to the thing that he carves onto his chest.
That's not even what I'm talking about. I mean the Monastery of Teshuvah, which, side note, Teshuvah is Hebrew. It literally means return, as in to return to something you've left or turned away from. Mm-hmm. But it's more commonly translated as repentance. But anyway, the concept of the Monastery of Teshuvah with these monks who built this massive electron microscope to scan the universe for God and saying it'll take 1,000 lifetimes to scan the entire universe, but we'll continue this work. It makes me think of that one short story, The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke, the sci-fi author best known for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That wasn't the reference that I would have gone. I was just thinking how similar it is to SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The fact that they are putting all this effort into basically finding extraterrestrial intelligence with telescopes or scanning things or searching for basically anything.
Right.
Which I'm sure was kind of an obvious parallel when writing this. What if SETI was run by monks trying to find their god?
Okay, but let me just for a second recap for you the plot of the 9 Billion Names of God, and you tell me what you think about the parallels here. So, first of all, I do need to mention it's a very different sort of story from Clarke's usual work, but it is really good. It is widely seen as one of the best sci-fi short stories ever written. But, okay, so the plot of the story: a Tibetan monastery seeks to record all 6 billion names of God, believing this to be the purpose of existence, and that when this purpose is complete, the universe will end. And hundreds of years ago, they created an alphabet capable of writing every possible name within 9 characters or fewer, and they've been at this task ever since, just writing down name after name after name and removing the junk until they get all the 6 billion names of God. And when the story begins, they're estimating it would take more than 10,000 years to complete this by hand. So they buy a computer and they hire 2 programmers to automate it for them. And the story ends as the programmers have finished the job and they're leaving to board their flight home. And right when they estimate, the computer should be finishing its task right about now, they look up and they see the stars quietly going out. So this idea of this monastery in this Tibetan monastery, automating this task of recording the names of God versus this Tibetan monastery who built a telescope to search the universe for God.
I could see some parallels, but
yeah, I shouldn't need to explain that why I wonder there might have been some influence there.
No, I can see it's almost like if you combine that with SETI. Although hearing the description of that story, I was not even aware of that story. I might have heard of it at some point, but it reminds me of the plot of the movie Pi, if you've ever seen that.
I have not.
Basically, this guy is a mathematician, and he's trying to search for patterns in the stock market in order to basically predict things. And he ends up working with a group of another mathematician whose data set is the Bible. And they end up somehow coming across the same number in both of their work. And they determine that the number is the true name of God.
That's an interesting premise for a film.
It's Darren Aronofsky, who's one of my favorite directors. He's done some pretty trippy stuff, but it's one of his earlier works. But yeah, it's a decently brisk watch. It's all in black and white, like a lot of lower budget indie movies, mostly as a cost cutting measure. But it's pretty good. It has a really nice what's the term? Very ostentatious direction, lots of close-up, lots of kind of blurry angles, lots of extreme angles.
I mean, Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So the people seem to be Amish at first.
I love the Shrimpkins. They are just very cute. These little this idea. Although actually Bender taking Malachi as his messenger to the rest of the Shrimpkins does carry some subtle symbolism. Because the name Malachi comes from the Hebrew word for messenger.
That makes sense. They would have done that on purpose.
Yeah, it's Futurama, and these writers know what they're doing. Pretty much any little bit of symbolism or foreshadowing, pretty clear that it was most likely intentional.
Like, also just the fact that Malachi is not really a traditional name. Like, it wouldn't make too much sense for him to have a name like John or something.
Right.
But why do these random aliens have Hebrew names?
I guess for the Bible symbolism.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Because they are going for a God thing. Although, speaking of, like, religion, I love it's just a quick gag, but I love the concept of the first amalgamated church.
I would be on board with that. Combine all the religions into one. They're all kind of the same anyway. Just to piss everybody off.
Yeah, so like looking at the sign there, I spotted symbols for Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, missing quite a few faiths there, at least in that, iconography.
Yeah, there's many religions out there that it would probably be missing.
Yeah, I like the joke of it. There's a lot of humor you can draw from this sort of thing, and I could totally see someone trying to do something like this. But it's very much like the whole Joseph Campbell hero's journey thing, where when you try to squeeze everything into like this one shape, you kind of have to chop off huge chunks and fudge stuff and like basically ignore a lot of context to make it work.
Like
not only that,
biscuits.
you end up having to kind of homogenize it so that it ends up becoming completely pointless.
Yeah, like that's a lot of what I mean. Like, you talk about, again, it's basically my issue with Joseph Campbell's work.
But it's still a funny gag.
It is. Like, as a joke, it is hysterical.
At first I thought he was going to the robot church, but no. Human amalgamization.
It would have been funny to see Reverend Lionel Preacherbot again, though. I'm not gonna lie. He's just an amusing character.
The stained glass in front kind of looked like him. Kind of looked like his chest.
Vaguely. I mean, probably the same design inspiration to whoever built him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like the detail of the god entity in this episode, not really knowing where Earth is off the top of its, I want to say head, but it doesn't really have a head.
Off the top of its cosmic dust.
I like the idea that even God doesn't know where he came from.
Yeah, I mean, if you were the first thing to exist, how would you know where no one remembers their birth. But like what I was getting at before, in a massive infinite universe full of wonder, of course God wouldn't know necessarily where Earth is off the top of his head. Why would God be so focused on a single world as so many people seem to believe?
Well, like the same different people believe that God can know because God is omnipotent, God has infinite power, and God has infinite knowledge. So of course he knows exactly where it is.
Question is, where does this leave the Niblonians in their story?
I'm not entirely sure.
This could, of course, be the reason why they had that sort of fallback where Bender suggests perhaps God is a space probe that collided into God, so it's not actually him. So it does not necessarily counteract the Niblonians.
Well, I think I remember hearing in the episode commentary that one of the writers pushed very hard to make it clear, like to leave it ambiguous whether or not this is actually God. So, that makes sense.
And we don't know if this God has always existed. It could have been born later.
So, you guys, what are your thoughts on just the philosophy espoused by the God in this episode?
When you do things right, people won't be sure you'll have done anything at all?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like people to know I've done things, but yeah, I understand, like, like, definitely not everything has to be attributed to you, because there's a lot of, I forget the term, but people,
Egotism?
Egotism, I guess, that with, performing godly acts, they will go like, hey, everybody, look at me, look how good I am. And
doing it entirely for the attention for their own egos.
even the Bible says to, like, pray in secret, to pray quietly to yourself instead of prostrating yourself.
Proselytizing?
Proselytizing, yes, thank you.
Personally, I do like the idea of, God not necessarily needing the credit for things, just because, that is very much the important thing, is to do good things and to help people, not necessarily to be recognized for it. Although it is nice to be recognized, it's not the point.
Yeah.
Where I have the problem is with it saying, like, if you do too much, people grow dependent, which, like, I really don't like that argument in general, because all too often it is used by libertarians and Randians to try to justify just not helping people at all.
Yeah.
Like, this is going a little off topic from the episode itself, but my take on God is quite simple. I find the idea of a benevolent God wholly incompatible with our current reality. If God exists, as far as I'm concerned, he is evil. And let me explain what I mean. God is supposed to be omniscient and omnipotent, right? So look at the world around us. All the suffering and the hardship people go through for no reason and in entirely unfair ways. If I see someone who's suffering, and I could wave a magic wand and fix all of their problems in a second, what would it say about me if I didn't do that? God has the ability to end all hardships in the world and make the earth a paradise for all of us with no effort. If he truly is omnipotent, he has that magic wand, not just on an individual scale, but on a global one. Allowing suffering to continue when you can do something about it is an active choice. You are making the choice not to intervene. And when you could intervene at zero material cost to yourself, and you make the choice not to do so, that is evil. God is evil.
Yeah, I believe in a higher power, that it exists, but I don't know if it cares.
So yeah, that's almost the same argument. It's like, if you believe in a higher power that exists and doesn't care, why worship it?
Yeah. I remember I was at religious services with my family at one point for the high holidays, and so we're basically Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Jews, sort of the equivalent of Christmas and Easter Christians.
Right.
That's fair.
So it was, I believe, a Yom Kippur service, and it was with my parents and my brother and my grandparents. And at the end of the service, there was this whole thing where Dad started talking to me about how, like, God, how basically he started talking to me. I don't remember why this conversation started, but he was talking about how he remembered from a bar mitzvah that he had gone to, where the passage being read was about, like, God killing people for idolatry, and then some people were like, hey, that might be a bit extreme, and so God killed all of them too. And then, like, since it was a bar mitzvah, you then have the kid, or I guess man, going like, what this passage says to me, blah 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 blah, what I learned from this. And my dad was just talking about how his lesson from that was, my lesson from this is God's an asshole.
Yeah.
I probably rambled on a bit longer than I intended to. I'm sorry, but, like,
well, yeah, the episode is called Godfellas. I think I think the topic is kind of evident.
It's a good episode, though.
Yeah, this is a good episode. This is again, it deals with the big topics. It deals with the concept of God, and when he is talking with, I remember reading a blog about, like, talking about all the like best Futurama episodes, and this one was listed. And the blog author wrote, if God exists, I hope he is similar to the God in this episode. Because, like, when the god says stuff like, you were doing well until everything dies, that is a joke, but you could sort of tell that he's being serious about it. He's like, you were doing a good job until everything died. And he wasn't really, like, taking the piss out of it. He wasn't really insulting him. It was just, that you're doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the bit of reassurance Bender needed. But yeah, I agree with you. This is a fantastic episode. Actually, I think Matt Groening cited this as one of his favorites. And it is pretty widely rated as one of the show's best. Like, I think Empire Magazine called it the best in the entire series. And looking it up, there was a fan poll by Comedy Central back in 2013 that put this in the top 10. Like, it is a very good episode. Even if you don't care for God, even if you're not really interested in the theology, it's really funny. There's a really sweet plot there. And yeah, it does go into this, philosophical territory on the theology of God and what he might be like. And honestly, there is so much more I could say about God. Like, I could go into the fundamental flaw in the Christian conception of heaven and hell, but that's maybe something for another time.
And but the idea is this episode almost tackles all that without getting into the uncomfortable parts of religion. The part, it talks about the stuff like being a creator or doing things for others, without necessarily saying that I will, like, those who don't worship me will be smited, or things like, you have to spread my word to others. And they do talk about that. They talk about how religion has kind of driven people apart or forced, like, non-believers and stuff. And it really does kind of touch very lightly on the uncomfortable stuff, but it still keeps things just... And they're not really saying which side is right in the situation. They're just saying, like, this is how different people handle religion. There's certain people that try to find God. There's certain people that try to preach God. There's certain people that ignore God or don't believe that God exists, and will attack those who feel differently. So it really kind of handles all the different aspects of religion without really siding with any of them, negatively or positively.
That's not a bad way to put it. Honestly, okay, so I mentioned before, like, my idea of the problem with heaven and hell, I think I am going to go into that after all, because, like, when are we going to have another opportunity to talk about it here?
Maybe
True.
The next time we see the robot devil.
Maybe. I'm not sure when he next shows up, but, like,
I don't remember.
I mean, I'm more focused on God here, though, is the thing. The devil, I don't really care about. So the idea of hell existing, at least if you ask me to look at it when you really think about it, it means heaven is definitionally not and can't be a paradise for good people. Just like, okay, think about it. If you're up in heaven with God in an endless paradise, and meanwhile billions of other people are down in hell being tortured for eternity, how does your heart not bleed for them? Like, how do you not confront God and cry out at this injustice?
I
feel like that kind of leads into the idea of catharsis. Like, the fact I've always believed that religion was invented because life inherently sucks. And there's, like, a lot of shitty stuff about life. And this especially started to come into... I know my timeline is off about this, but this came into things, right, where one person would get everything and everybody else would toil and be bullied and be beaten down, and, like, they'd be forced to, like, work in the fields all day and then die and never have anything. And everybody is like, life fucking sucks. Is this really all everything is? And then everybody's like, well, maybe something happens afterwards. Like, maybe that explains what will happen to shitty people if we do nothing. Eventually they'll go to hell and they'll be tortured forever. And wouldn't that be cathartic? It's the idea of catharsis. It's like, evil people are tortured forever and you get to be smug and an asshole about it. And it's like, that doesn't make things better.
That's very Karl Marx of you. Because, like, okay, there is the famous quote, religion is the opiate of the masses, which many people often misinterpret to be about, like, saying, oh, it's a system of control, it's a drug. But at the time he wrote that, opium was a widely used painkiller. It was, like, seen as a legitimate medicine.
No, you can interpret it in many different ways. Like, yeah, the idea that religion is the opiate of the masses is something that is comforting, something that is calming.
Exactly, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, but but to use a modern term, it's copium.
God, I hate that. I hate that term. It is such a stupid word.
Oh, this person has a natural coping mechanism. Ha ha, huffing on the copium. Fuck you.
I just have to address, like, one more thing about my idea of heaven and hell, though, because, like, I didn't get to go into this, because I know there are going to be some Christians who may or may not listen to this, and be like, yeah, but that's fair. Those people deserve to be down there. And I'm just like, if your empathy doesn't extend to those suffering in hell, if you do genuinely believe that they deserve it, that anyone could be so terrible as to actually deserve to be tortured for literally eternity with no hope of recourse, no hope of redemption. If you consider that to be justice,
what the hell are you doing in heaven?
Yeah, how exactly are you a good person? If you can't extend your empathy to everyone, if you are even capable of enjoying your paradise in heaven while others suffer in hell, then you are fundamentally a selfish person undeserving of your own paradise. As long as hell exists, there can't be heaven. That's my problem with the Christian conception of heaven and hell. And, like, even back to the core issue of God himself, any God who would be willing to set up such an intrinsically wrongful system, that's not a God I would want to spend eternity with in the first place.
If heaven is filled with the kind of people that you meet worshiping religion here on earth, why the hell would I want to go there?
Exactly. Like, the idea that God will condemn you simply not just for not being a good person, but for failing to worship him, as many people believe he will, that's not justice. That's a threat. That's coercion.
I went to Catholic high school, and one of the things, like, I had a religion class. Like, that was, like, one of my period, like, we had, like, a class, like, one of our 6 periods was to go to religion. And one of the things that they and this is also coincided with our, like, not PE, but, like, health studies and things like that, and which of course talked about puberty and things like that. And they basically said, like, if you masturbate and don't confess, you will go to hell.
I don't
understand. Why should God care about that?
Yeah, that is, like, the dumbest
because
thing.
with the basic stance on religion is, if it feels good, stop. If it feels good, it's a sin. Happiness is the enemy of religion. If you're happy, you don't need God, and that's the problem.
If you're happy and you know it, go to hell.
Yes, exactly.
And you know it, go to hell.
I think that's mainly a Catholic thing, to be fair. Although, I mean, there is the Protestant work ethic thing, which is a topic for another time, and how much that's ruined our society.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, to be fair, I am Jewish, so I am fundamentally coming at this whole God thing from a different angle than a Christian would. But
yeah, I went to Catholic school, and it's like that's where I come from. I went to Catholic school for a while. I went to church with my parents, of course, and then shortly after 9/11, I was like, I think I'm leading away from organized religion.
Yeah, like, I've never really been especially spiritual. For me, my religion is mainly a cultural thing. You know, I'm Jewish. Those are my people. That is my
exactly.
culture.
What's like that's the thing. It's like with a lot of people, it's like, you would have to say what your race and what your religion is, in two separate ideas. But with Jewish people, it's just, I'm Jewish. That's both.
Yeah, like, that's the thing that really gets me, is that, like, in Judaism, we don't really have this idea of heaven and or hell, this eternal reward or punishment. There really isn't a whole lot said in Jewish scripture on the topic of the afterlife. Really, the most that is said firmly is this idea of, like, the world to come, which is so vague and so nebulous that it could be just another world, like a cycle or something. It could be a single afterlife for everyone. It could even be reincarnation. There's a lot of different interpretations of it, and none of these are really any more correct than any other, because it's one of those things that we fully admit we can't know. Like, and that's the thing about Judaism. That's what I kind of appreciate compared to other religions, is that debate and analysis is very much valued and can even be considered a form of worship in itself.
Yeah, that's something I really hate about Christianity. It's like, this is what the Bible says, and that's it. That end of discussion.
Yeah, every Jewish congregation I've ever been a part of will have, like, interpretations where you have, like, a rabbi talking about how, like, what this tells us, blah, 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 blah. But, like, if you have your own interpretation, that's fine. That's cool. You're welcome to that. And, in fact, they will happily debate you on it if you want. It's, like, again, even what I mentioned earlier, like, at your bar bat or b'nai mitzvah, you will be given a Torah portion to read, and then you are asked to interpret it and say what you take from it. And this is straight up what you are supposed to do.
Yeah, I've been to a bat mitzvah.
Yeah, so it's just like, so I just fundamentally am coming at this from a very different angle than mainstream Christianity here, where I see God and I see someone's conception of God and I can't help but question it. And, like, from my perspective, from where I'm coming from, there really is no way to have a God as conceived by mainstream Christianity, and I guess by extension most of our pop culture, and not have him be the single most vile being to ever exist. There's no squaring that circle. This has gotten into some really heavy topics for a show that has a robot floating through space.
Let's kind of wrap it up, because let's wrap this thing up quickly, much like the episode did, with a quite literal Deus Ex Machina.
I don't know if you could say it's Deus Ex Machina, because it's not all of a sudden, that God is there. It's not like God suddenly, hey, it's God.
Yes, but he does handle things in such a way that you're not sure whether he did anything, and based on the whole space probe thing, the Ex Machina part really does kind of come into play even a bit more.
Well, see, that's the thing. It is literally a Deus Ex Machina, but it doesn't actually fit the definition of Deus Ex Machina because it was very much set up throughout the episode.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
So it's a literal Deus Ex Machina without being a figurative one. That's rare.
Yeah, I'm genuinely impressed they managed to pull this off.
Yeah. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
No thoughts, head empty.
I mean, the audience. What does the audience think?
Yes, tell us what you thought of this episode.
I mean, they can't. This is pre-recorded.
Well, yeah, but...
There's comments. There's a comment section.
There's a comment section.
In as much as that counts. If you'll excuse me, I'm off to go write the one commandment for my followers.
Nobody needs booze.
What would be the one thing you would want?
Money. Then I can get whatever else I want.
I'd want food.
Peace and quiet.
The one commandment, Nova needs HRT.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yep, that's a good one, but if I could just pass one commandment, it would honestly just be good to each other.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it comes down to.
Be nice.
The one commandment, don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick about the ships you don't like.
Will Wheaton would be proud.
Thank you for listening to Space Podcast 3000. Your three voices of the future are Nova Altman, Doug Hancox, and Eden Valerie. The theme music is Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod. You can support the show and listen to new episodes a full week earlier at patreon.com/SpacePod3K. Follow us on Twitter at SpacePod3K. Be sure to join us next time as the Planet Express crew faces a hostile takeover in Future Stock.